Shalom, shalom. Davon Mays here. Clouds of Torah presents funerals and burial in the Tanakh for Bnei Noach, the descendants of Noah. A lot of people have been asking questions about, what are the arrangements for funerals and things of this nature. The Torah really doesn't give commands as far as how to be buried or funeral arrangements, but there is a lot of information about it. But as far as like a direct command, I think that would pretty much, be based on your culture. Um, there's many different cultures around the world. That do things a lot differently. But as far as what the Tanakh says, we're going to get into it. So we're going to dive right in. So Abraham is told he would be buried and not cremated. We know today a lot of people get cremated. I know it's a cheaper way to be buried. Funerals can be expensive, anywhere from five to $10,000, $15,000, depending on what type of service you have with the police escorts and different types of caskets and the suits and all types of things. So that's pretty much based on people's budgets and of course their culture. So here in the States, it can vary, very drastically. But we're gonna just stick to the Tanakh and go from there. So in Genesis 15:15, now as far as you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. So the Tanakh really doesn't say at this specific time if people were being cremated, but Abraham was told he would be buried. He's not told he would be cremated. Genesis 25:9, and his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave at Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite. So, very, very well known person in the Tanakh, Abraham, the father of nations, is buried. He is not cremated. Abraham and Sarah were buried. Genesis 23:19. Excuse me. And after this, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So in the same place Abraham was buried, he buried his wife. Genesis 25:10, the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth, there Abraham was buried, and Sarah his wife. So we see Abraham bought the cave to bury Sarah. He could have, of course, went the cheap route, put some wood together, put some rocks together, put her somewhere, and just burned her body. But that's not what he did. Buried under a tree, Genesis 35:8. Now, Deborah, Rebecca's nurse, died, and she was buried below Bethel under the terebinth tree. So the name of it was called Alon Bakuth. So even Deborah, even though she wasn't necessarily a relative, she was still buried. She was, part of the family, of course, being Rebecca's nurse, but who knows? It could have been an auntie. It really doesn't specify. It just says this was her nurse, but she also was buried um, under a tree. So they didn't take the cheap route. They took the time to actually dig up the area and bury her. Rachel was buried while traveling, Genesis 35:19. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. So even while traveling, they had to take time, set aside, dig a hole, and bury Sarah. Um, again, she was not cremated. So we see a pattern here of just specifically talking about, the nation of Israel, and from Abraham to Rachel so far, we see a pattern of burial and no cremation. Israel practices burial when in the land. Numbers 11:34. So when he called the name of that place Kibroth Hatava, because there they buried the people who had yielded to craving. Again, out in the desert, Israel is burying people. They're not cremating them. They're not setting up fires. They're taking their time to actually bury the people. So we see a pattern from Genesis through Numbers of Israel specifically burying people. Now, up until this point, up until they came up out of Egypt and were given the Torah, they were considered B'nai Noach, just for the record. because I know somebody's going to say, well, you're talking about Israel now. Yes, I'm talking about Israel, but we just see the pattern of this family, which were originally B'nai Noach, as everybody in the world were burying their people once they died. The grave of Moses is hidden, Deuteronomy 34:6, and he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no one knows his grave to this day. So even Moses has a grave. He was not cremated. Was the great burning of cremation. So in 2 Chronicles 16:14, they buried him in his own tomb, which he had made for himself in the city of David. And they laid him in the bed, which was filled with spices and various ingredients, prepared in a mixture of ointments. They made a very great burning for him. So some people say this is proof of cremation because it says they made a great burning for him, but there's some different opinions going on here. Cambridge Bible for schools and colleges. A very great burning, 2 Chronicles 21:19. Was it here meant? What is here meant is not cremation of the body, but only a burning of spices. And the reference is Jeremiah 34:5. So Jameson, Fawcett, Brown Bible commentary, they made a very great burning for him, according to some, for consuming the spices. According to others, it was a magnificent pile for the cremation of the corpse. A usage was at that time and long after prevalent among the Hebrews, and the omission of which in the case of royal personages was reckoned a great indignity. So the other opinion is this was a cremation, because Israel began to take up the practices of the other nations, which they were not supposed to be doing. So if this was a cremation, it it was an indignity, because this is shameful for them to be practicing what the nations practice. When we see throughout their lineage, they were already burying their people. Now all of a sudden, they're practicing what the nation's doing and are engaging in cremation. So the references are 2 Chronicles 21:19, 1 Samuel 31:12, Jeremiah 34:5, and Amos 6:10. So indignity is the treatment or circumstances that cause one to feel shame or to lose one's dignity. So it was a type of a punishment when you are not buried with your fathers. So I'll give some examples. Genesis 49:29. Then he charged them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite. So we see somebody requesting to be buried with their fathers. They didn't want to die and not be with their people. So this was, something that people wanted to keep the family heritage going. This is what they did with their people. He says, bury me with my fathers. I believe this is Jacob talking to Joseph when he's about to die. So in 2 Chronicles 28:27, so Ahaz rested with his fathers, and they buried him in the city in Jerusalem, but they did not bring him to the tombs of the kings of Israel. Then Hezekiah, his son, reigned in his place. So Ahaz rested with his fathers, but they buried him in the city in Jerusalem. They didn't bring him to the tombs of the kings. This was an indignity because, when you're wicked, there's certain type of punishments or embarrassments that happen to you. 1 Kings 13:22. But you came back, ate bread and drank water in the place of which the Lord said to you, eat no bread and drink no water. Your corpse shall not come to the tomb of your fathers. So this is where the prophet disobeyed the Most High. And now he's telling them, as a punishment, your corpse shall not come to the tomb of your fathers, which is an indignity, because this is an embarrassment of you're not being buried with your fathers. So we see how important it was for people to be buried with their fathers as requested in Genesis 49:29. So it doesn't look like cremation was part of this agenda with Israel, but it was something that they took up when they began to see what the nations were doing. And we know they have a very bad habit throughout the Tanakh of following what the nations did. They shall burn incense for you. This is that reference from Jeremiah 34:5. You shall die in peace, as in the ceremonies of your fathers, the former kings who were before you. So they shall burn incense for you and lament for you, saying, alas, Lord, for I have pronounced the word, says the Lord. So when it says that there was a great burning in some instances, some claim this is just the burning of the incense, because it says they will burn incense for you. Some claim no, it was an actual cremation. So there's an argument there. But we know if it was a cremation, it was not something prescribed as a family heritage. It was something that they picked up from the surrounding nations. Saul and his sons' bodies were burned. 1 Samuel 31:12. And all the valiant men arose and traveled all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beth-shan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. So again, these bodies did not come to the tombs of their fathers, which was an indignity or an embarrassment, because we know what happened to Saul. Unfortunately, even being a king, Saul was not buried, but they were burned. So again, we don't see burning something that Israel did in the practice of in the practices of something that Abraham would have prescribed. So was this an embarrassment? I guess you could say that, because the way Saul ended his kingship was not a good look. Burning of spices, 2 Chronicles 21:19. Then it happened in the course of time after the end of 2 years that his intestines came out because of his sickness. So he died in severe pain, and his people made no burning for him like the burning for his fathers. So again, this reference of 2 Chronicles 21:19, the footnote says burning of spices. But it says here they made no burning for him like the burning for his fathers. Why didn't they make a burning for him? I don't know. There's another reason that is put out there that they did burn bodies, though. And it was not necessarily for the cremation purposes of being like the nations, but it was for sanitary reasons and for health reasons. Matthew Poole's commentary, he that burneth him, though the Jews mostly buried, yet in some cases they burned the dead bodies as in this of wasting pestilence, when they could not carry them out either for fear of infecting others or for want of help. So we see here it says, because of his sickness, so he died in severe pain. So sometimes people were dying and they were sick, and for fear of infecting others, right? It says, as in this of wasting pestilence, when I think that should say, as in the case of wasting pestilence, when they could not carry them out, either for fear of infecting others or for want of help. So if you didn't have enough people to bring the body out of the house, you would just burn it. Because it says, to bring out the bones of the house, all that remain, the flesh of the dead being consumed to ashes, the bones are reserved to be buried and laid up in some sepulchre. I can't say this word. Sepulchre, if I'm saying that right. Sepulchre is basically a grave of their ancestors. Sepulchre. I don't know, but I think that this is referring to a grave. Well, I know it's referring to a grave, but I can't say that word for some reason. But it says they brought the bones out of the house, but to bury them, but they actually burned the body because they didn't want to infect nobody, because they was, the house was contaminated, whatever the case was going on, the surrounding bed or whatever, and they didn't want to bring somebody out because of a pestilence. So they would burn that body in that case. That wasn't necessarily them copying the nations. It was basically, for sanitary reasons. So again, not being buried was a punishment. Jeremiah 8:1-3. Excuse me. At that time, says the Lord, they shall bring out the bones of the kings of Judah and the bones of its princes and the bones of the priests and bones of the prophets and the bones of the inhabitants of Jerusalem out of their graves. They shall spread them before the sun and the moon and all the hosts of heaven, which they have loved, which they have served, and after which they have walked, which they have sought, and which they have worshipped. They shall not be gathered nor buried. They shall be like refuse on the face of the earth. Then death shall be chosen rather than life by all the residue of those who remain of this evil family, who remain in all the places where I have driven them, says the Lord of hosts. So here we see a clear punishment of taking the bodies out of the grave as an embarrassment, or the bones at least, right? It says you should bring out the bones of the kings of Judah and the bones of the princes and lay them out and basically let them worship the sun symbolically. Of course, they're dead, but since this is what they wanted to do, this is what they're going to get to do. It says they shall not be gathered nor buried. They should be like refuse on the face of the earth. So again, we see burial as a privilege. And when you upset the Most High, he will deal with you accordingly. Jeremiah 16:4. They shall die gruesome deaths. They shall not be lamented, nor shall they be buried, but they shall be like refuse on the face of the earth. They shall be consumed by the sword and by famine, and their corpses shall be meat for the birds of heaven and for the beasts of the earth. Beasts of the earth. So again, no burial. Now their bodies are going to be eaten by the animals. So another embarrassment. So we don't see cremation as a form of, or something that was done at funerals prescribed by the Torah. We see it happen in cases, but it was not something that was practiced by early Israel or early B'nai Noach. Ezekiel 6:5, and I will lay the corpses of the children of Israel before their idols, and I will scatter your bones all around your altars. So again, when they're not buried, it's a form of a punishment. Bodies laid before the idols is a sign of disapproval. So the Most High is upset, and he's going to put your idols in front of your altars of your idols. He's going to put your body or your corpse in front of the idols that you worshipped. This is what he did in Ezekiel 6:5. So the conclusion, it looks like the B'nai Noach, or the children of Noah, were simply buried in caves, on the road, or near trees. Embalming was offered to royalty, and the mourning lasted from 7 to 70 days. We see in Genesis 50:1-3. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for him, for such are the days required for those who are embalmed. And the Egyptians mourned him for 70 days. Should probably be highlighted. Genesis 50:10. Then they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, and they mourned there with a great and very solemn lamentation. He observed 7 days of mourning for his father. So again, different customs. This was B'nai Noach. This is pre-Torah, given at Mount Sinai. And we see the Egyptians mourn for 70 days. Here we see an observance of 7 days. But he was buried. He was embalmed, but he was buried. He was not cremated. So there you have it. I forget who asked me this specifically off the top of my head, but shout out to those who did ask this question so I could actually do this lesson. So if you know who you are, shout out to you. And I think that will pretty much cover things. Like I said, different customs is going to have different things you want to say at funerals, if there's, different type of eulogies or whatever. But overall, today people are embalmed and buried, and people are embalmed and cremated. Well, I guess they would be embalmed for the funeral and then cremated afterwards. But yeah, I think embalming is pretty standard practice across the board. But as far as B'nai Noach and Israel, it looks like burial was the way to go based on what the forefathers did from B'nai Noach and from an Israelite perspective. And cremation was something that they picked up from the nations. So with that being said, we'll see you next time, and shalom.